Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to the YouTube channel of the Dunholm Camera Club. A very, very slightly different screen for you this evening because we've got one in the foreground, one in the background, but we will explain that later. So I do hope that you're all well and coping with the up and down weather. I think we're experiencing a bit of warmer weather at the moment to what it's going to be over the weekend, so get your raincoats out because Saturday and Sunday's supposed to be wet. So yeah, let's say a hello to one or two people. Good evening, Jill. Jill's doing the towel on the chair jobby again, so good evening, Jill. Gail, good evening, Gail. Not seen many photos this week, Gail, of sunsets and sunrises. Are you not managing to get up early in the morning? Sorry, I didn't really mean that. Honest. Evening, Graham H. Good evening to your good self. Who else have we got? Richard. Yes. Now, don't blame me for the two icons. Just blame young Neil. We're just trying it a little bit different so that both sessions are there to start with. Now, I think you will all have seen tonight that the first session is always the lower one. So hopefully it will help a little bit to have the lower one there. Well, both sessions there to start with. Saves me having to rush in the break to create the next part. And if you look in the description of the first session that you're watching, then you will see a link to the second section. So when I say, right, we're going into a break and we'll see you in 10 minutes, you'll be able to just click on that link in the description below and you will be able to go straight, fingers crossed, straight to the second session without having to do a lot. But if all else fails, just look for the icon and start with the icon. So let's just see who else is here. Where did I get to? I got to Richard, didn't I? Good evening, Richard. Tony. Good evening, Tony. Yes, Tony. Sue. Who else have we got? Jim. Good evening, Jim. Lots of comments. Good evening, Doreen. And I'll say good evening to Jan. When I see Doreen's name, it always reminds me to say good evening to Jan and also to Gromit. So welcome to you two as well. Who else have we got? Peter, I've said hello. Viv. Good evening, Viv. Hope you are well. And Vera, I skipped one there, didn't I? Good evening, Vera. Who else? Having this week. Yeah. Well, I suppose that's why we haven't seen the pictures, Gail. So yeah. So you can. I'm just asking, Jill, you can see that link easy enough, can you? It's just interesting to see if you can see the link. So I think from myself, I watch quite a bit of YouTube on the television. And if you're watching YouTube on the television, then you don't see the description below. So if you're watching on laptops or computers, PCs, desktops, etc., you can see the bits and bobs below. But with a television, you just get the whole picture. so you might not see that link. So don't panic, just do it as normal. Who else? Good evening, John. Good evening, John. John's just popped up there. Paul, good evening, Paul. Michael Hughes, good evening, Michael. Pleased to see everybody on. Graham H said he had to click the see more to see the link. So if you're all just following the chat there, just have a go. Let us know whether it's easier, whether it's not easier, whether it's a good idea or whether you like the old idea. We've got to move with the times though, so do make sure that you give it a go. So good evening, Keith. Hope you are well. Good evening, Caroline. Popping up nice and quickly now. So good evening, everybody. We're just about coming up to time now. So I'll just start with a few bits and bobs. There's nothing really no messages or notices this evening. Nice quiet week for you, so that's not too bad. As you all I've just read what Jill put. She's been there that long. You shouldn't put your blooming towel on the front seat, Jill. You should come at the same time as everybody else. We've got Caroline doing as a talk this evening. That's not Caroline O, it's Caroline S, who you will see in a short while. Oh, Bob's just popped in. Good evening, Bob. Yes, I'm keeping well, thank you very much. And I said the same to everybody a little bit earlier. So we hope that everybody is well and ready for Caroline's talk this evening. So I am going to let Caroline do her own talking, and so consequently she will introduce herself and of course give you a little bit of a rundown on the talk. As you saw originally, it's India, away from the Western Tourist Trail. Now if I've got that wrong, I'm sure Caroline will tell me off or put me right. But good evening. I just saw somebody else pop up. Good evening, Dane. Good evening, Dane. So right, it is time now, so I'm just going to click on to Caroline so that she can just unmute herself, which she has done. I'm going to shut down this picture. You can see at this moment in time Caroline's first picture, which she'll explain in a moment. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Caroline, let her introduce herself, let her tell you what's going to happen this evening, and as usual we'll aim to stop at 8 o'clock for 10 minutes. We'll come back on and then we'll start at 1:15 again. So without further ado, over to you, Caroline.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's very strange sort of talking to myself, looking at pictures on the laptop, and having no sort of connection at all with the audience. But so please bear with me if it doesn't flow properly. I'll just do my best. And thanks to everybody who's tuned in, and I do hope you'll enjoy the evening. And Graham did get the title right. It is India, Away from the Western Tourist Trail, and is mainly about my visit to India last November. I first went to India in 1994 and loved it. And that trip was a sort of organized trip, doing the Taj Mahal and all the sort of main sites and the traditional sites. But since then, I've been well away from the tourist trail, starting off with a trip to Kashmir, in 2007, which is where this picture was taken. But I've been back 3 times since the original trip, and that's all thanks to my very good friend Trina, who I've known for more than 30 years, and we worked together at the Wildlife Trust National Office for 10 years. She has had a long-standing relationship with India and now lives in Delhi, where she's married. And her in-laws own houseboats in Kashmir. And in 2007, Dave and I visited. It was an exceedingly interesting trip. Absolutely stunning scenery and wonderful place. But Kashmir is really not ready for the return of tourism. And it still isn't. It was quite quiet when we went there, when we set off to go there. But while we were there, some more trouble broke out, and it really wasn't quite as safe as we might have wished. But anyway, we got back safely. My third trip to India was in 2010, when Trina and I travelled to the Western Ghats, which again is a fascinating place, a fascinating area. And we went to places that Western tourists rarely visit. But this trip, my latest trip, was this time last year. I just can't believe how things have changed. I was so lucky to get there last year, because it really wouldn't happen now. Trina wanted to explore Manipur State, which is in northeast India, and I was very happy to accompany her. The states in northeast India have been sort of almost inaccessible to until quite recently. The people there don't really identify with India. They're a long way from the majority of India. There's a little sort of narrow strip that goes between the main part of India and out into the northeast. And the people don't look Indian. They could be taken for Korean or even Tibetan, and obviously very closely akin to people of Myanmar, which is on the border. Because they don't identify with India, there's been quite a bit of insurgency in the recent past, and there's still support in some quarters for independence for that area. Trina's connection to northeast India stemmed from her mother's time out there. Her mother was Ursula Graham Bowers, went off to Manipur State in 1937, loved it and its people, and returned in 1939, and then spent the war there. The story of her mother's adventures are in a book which, sorry, the pictures come out a bit small there, her book Naga Path, which is quite a fascinating read. So she spent the whole war in the Naga Hills, living with the Naga people and documenting their lifestyle as an anthropologist. She took a lot of photographs using a Leica for stills and a cine camera. And this is one of her chief assistant, Nam Kibung, I'm not sure whether I pronounced that right, with her movie camera. And her photographic collection are in the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. The area was sort of very important during the war because it was on the borders of Burma, as it was known then, and a very important frontier. And Trina's mother worked with the local people to gather information on the movement of Japanese forces. While she was there, she was adopted by a Naga family. And when Trina visited the village where her mother had lived, she was adopted too. So she's a Naga. So that's a bit of introduction to where I was going and why. And Trina wanted to know more about the Manipur state, which she hadn't visited as much as some of the other areas. But before we get to Manipur, I flew into Kolkata and over here, and stayed for a couple of days in Calcutta in this wonderful building, Nagaland House. Trina spent much of last year working for the Kohima Institute in Nagaland, the neighbouring state to Manipur. And she got to know Tia, who is high up in the Department of Tourism and works from Nagaland House when she's in Kolkata. And this Nagaland House is used by state officials to stay there when they're in the city. But it wasn't too busy at that time, so I was able to check in. I'm not quite sure what a proper hotel in Kolkata costs, but it was 1,000 rupees a night to stay there, which is £10. So that wasn't too bad. And that's my first taste of Naga hospitality and generosity. Tia arranged for me to be met at the airport. We went out to dinner, and it was just wonderful to have a friendly face when you first arrive in a strange city. That's Nagaland. The Nagaland House isn't in the centre of Kolkata, it's towards the edge, and that's its location there. I thought about getting a bus into town the next day, but it was a little bit daunting. And Tia introduced me to Uber, which I hadn't actually tried out before, because there's not much call for Uber taxis in Lincoln. So that worked all right, and got to the flower market. This was somewhere I'd been wanting to go. It looked as if it was going to be particularly colourful, and it didn't disappoint at all. Excuse me. This was I spent the whole day on my own, just wandering around. And it's the only day really in the holiday where I was able to concentrate on photography. Obviously, when you're with other people, it's difficult to devote all your time to that, but I was able to just stop and stare. I had with me a bridge camera, not a particularly good one, a Nikon Coolpix B700, which I've since traded in. It didn't really suit me very well, but it did the job anyhow. And a little Lumix TZ60 compact, and of course my phone as well. So starting off at the flower market at Mullik Ghat. It's a wholesale market beside the river Hooghly. And underneath, it starts off underneath the Howrah Bridge, which is up in the top right. So the first pictures were taken from the bridge looking down. And there was so much going on. There's just everything going on all around, and nobody was taking any notice whatsoever of me. I was totally incidental to them because they were just doing their jobs. But they also weren't interested in posing for pictures. And it was very difficult to sort of disentangle individual shots from the great mass of colour and activity. It was a fantastic area to be in. There were some Western tourists. I saw a couple on the bridge, and that was it. And I saw another couple of Westerners later on in the day, but really there weren't many white folk around. And there's just so much variety. There were the marigolds in the previous pictures, and just leaves. I'm not quite sure what was happening with those. He was weighing out marigolds. It was a wholesale market, so it was people were taking them away for their own use elsewhere. And I could have stayed there for ages. Well, I did stay there for quite a long time. Just so much to see. But as I said, it's quite difficult to disentangle people and certainly difficult. It was difficult to get them to look in the right direction. So this is the only picture I actually worked up for a competition. And I like it, but it would have been so much better if there'd been some eyes. But never mind, you can't get everything. So I started off at Howrah Bridge, and then walked south to the second Hoodley Bridge, which I'm not quite sure how far it is, but it was very hot anyway, but very pleasant. And I spent the whole day just walking beside the river. The first bit, sort of going south from the bridge, I had to walk on the road a bit. But then I got into the park, which runs all the way down to the second crossing. And I think some of it was done, part of it's called Millennium Park, so I presume it was laid out and prettied up in 2000. There's a lot of signs all around Kolkata about restricting use of plastic, and signs up everywhere, which is good. I'd done some research, and there were boat trips going along the river, which sounded like a good way of spending the day. So I had planned on getting the lunch trip, where you get on a boat and spend 2 or 3 hours going up and down the river and have a lunch thrown in. So this is where the boats go from. And but the problem was, when I got there, they decided they weren't going to run that day. I think it was probably because there was a wedding going on. So I kept on walking, and that was fine. There's just so much to look at. The barges are very sort of evocative, interesting. And all these little boats, which I think were ferrying things backwards and forwards from the shore to the barges. People watching too. I mean, there was just, you could spend weeks there. I wouldn't really want to dip my toes, never mind the rest of me, into the Hoodley River. But obviously some people find it worthwhile. And people just doing things beside the river. I'm not quite sure what she was doing, but it looks as if she's taken her pots down to wash. And just people strolling around. And I think she must have been doing her washing. But whatever it was, they all looked so colourful and beautiful and fascinating. There's a bit of wildlife too. There were palm squirrels everywhere. They're rather cute, like sort of a cross between a chipmunk and a squirrel. And a few birds. I didn't get many good shots, but that I think is a pond heron, Indian pond heron, just perched beside the river, waiting for a fish. And there are all sorts of things to see if you have time to stop and stare. There's people washing and so on the boat. And then if you look down below, there's that dog. And the dog was actually eyeing up this carcass that was just lying on the edge of the river. It had obviously been there for a little while. But the smell wasn't actually wafting up, so I was far enough away. Other people were taking photographs. I'm not quite sure what they were doing, but they looked quite happy. And then there's, again, people going backwards and forwards to barges. washing in the river. And it was just fascinating. As afternoon drew on, I was getting decidedly tired. So, and I found this, the Flotel. It's a hotel which had a bar and a sort of cafe area. So I managed to get myself a seat on the deck, looking out with a cold drink and just watch things. This is a picture I entered for the recent Chairman's Challenge competition, and Bob was right. It was a picture of the river with the bridge in the background rather than the picture of the bridge, but it was a wonderful scene. And I think this is the reason why I didn't get onto my boat trip. This is a special wedding boat or special occasions boat, and this was launched. And presumably there will be a party going on in there somewhere. I was fascinated by these little fishing boat, which was so small with all these ferries and large boats going past, kept being caught in the wake. And the light was so good, and it was just really wonderful to watch. And I managed to work some of them up into decent pictures, but again, nobody is looking in my direction, so they don't make perfect pictures at all. But I find them pleasing anyway. And I could see the sun was going down rather fast. So I left the Flotel quickly to get a better view. And this was just a straight from the camera image here, looking south down the river to the second Hoogly Bridge. And then very quickly, the sun goes down. And this is a picture I did work up for a competition, and one I like very much. So that was my day in Kolkata, when I was expecting to see some Western tourists, but as I say, I think it was about 4. Then the next day, I flew off from Kolkata to Imphal, which is the capital of Manipur. Manipur is one of the 6 Northeast Indian states. There's Mizoram and Tripura, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce all that, and Nagaland and Assam, and bordering on Myanmar. There's a central valley surrounded by low mountains, which are presumably sort of shaped by the tectonic plate movement, because they're all in these lines, and it's fascinating scenery. The foothills of the Himalayas, really. So in Imphal, I was met at the airport by my good friend Trina and Lungri, who's a Zemi Naga from Laisong village in Assam, where Trina's mother spent the war. And he stayed with Trina and her husband in Delhi while he was studying. And he also worked with her at the Kohima Institute in Nagaland last year. And we were very lucky to have him traveling with us, because he was able to communicate with those who couldn't speak English and do our shopping and cooking, and he was just very good company. So that was good. And we stayed in a homestay, they're called there, which is basically like a B&B, with a lovely host who's an environmental activist, so we had plenty to talk about. and he was really helpful, arranging, finding us drivers and things like that. And that was, again, more sort of hospitality and helpfulness and generosity, and the people were what mattered, really. And another person who helped make it a memorable trip was Yai, who showed us round the Kangla Fort in the centre of Imphal. He has his own tourism business and has written books on the history of the area, particularly the Second World War. And he's one of the mighty Meitei people who have inhabited the Imphal Valley for millennia, with records going back 2,000 years. And as with all the people we met, very proud of his identity and very fiercely defending his identity and his land. The Kangla Fort area was where the rulers lived. It's a lot of this has been reconstructed, and what very few people know is that it's here that in Manipur state that polo was first invented as a game. It's I'm not quite sure how all this came about, but anyway, it's been taken up all over the place now. Imphal played a particularly important role in the Second World War. And during that time, Kangla Fort area was a military base, and General Slim, who was very important in that area, was based here. Because Manipur is right on the border with Burma, then although it was where the Japanese were going to come through if they had managed to do so, and there were very important battles at both Imphal in Manipur and Kohima in Nagaland, just to the north, which stopped the invasion. After the war, Manipur became part of India. Not everybody agreed with that. The people don't easily identify with India. And the Assam Rifles were based in Kangla Fort until very recently. It's only in the last sort of few years that the barbed wire has mostly been taken down, and the people of Manipur Imphal can actually go back into their ancient land, the most important area for them. So it wasn't always a very happy time. There has been quite a bit of uprising around there. So another person we met Grace on the right there, at dinner, and said we wanted to visit the war cemetery. She's an amazing woman. She's a human rights activist in all sorts of things. And actually had an article in The Guardian the other day, which was rather nice to read. We said we wanted to visit the war cemetery, so she picked us up with her friend Ningringam, who is a pastor. Most of the Naga people, and these are Naga people, not Meitei people. So Christianity is the main religion now. There's been conversions to Christianity began in the late 19th century, and the majority of people we met had a very strong Christian belief. So we went to the war cemetery, which is maintained by the Commonwealth Graves Commission. and there's panels explaining the story of the Battle of Imphal in the Second World War. If that battle and the Battle of Kohima had been lost, the Japanese could have come into India, but they didn't. So the war graves, and they carry on. There's immaculately maintained, and the people look after them very well indeed. And more generosity. We left there, and Ningringam said, "You must come and have lunch at my daughter's restaurant." So we did, and he treated us. People were just so generous. Imphal has quite a few markets. We went to the women's market. All the stallholders are women, which is quite interesting. Unfortunately, we didn't get there till late afternoon, and the light was fading, which means that most of my photographs are pretty bad. But if I didn't want to use a flash because that would have been too intrusive. And really, I should have changed the ISO. But the scenes were absolutely amazing. So they also found Westerners quite fascinating. Well, apart from the woman in front of behind the coconuts, who didn't really. The colours of the materials were absolutely tremendous. It was just wonderful. And these two killed themselves laughing at me wanting to take their pictures. But unfortunately, their picture's not very good. And that would have made a lovely shot if I'd got it in focus, but there was very little light at all. Everybody's got a mobile phone, and many of the stall holders were sitting there watching Netflix, I think. Tremendous variety of fish there were around as well. And I'm not quite sure of the situation. Outside the market, there were a lot of people selling things as well, just on the edge of the market. I didn't really fancy those dried fish, but I'm sure they're very nice. And more dried fish. And this woman here is just wrapping everything up very quickly because a policeman's coming along. I don't think they had the right to be there, but they look resigned to wrapping everything up and then unwrapping it again 5 minutes later. But fascinating. So on from Imphal, excuse me a minute. We headed south to Loktak Lake. Which I'd flown over a couple of days before. It's a huge lake in the central valley of Imphal, and much of it is floating vegetation. It's grown out from the edge and floats on the surface with water underneath. It's an amazing ecosystem. The Imphal Valley itself is very fertile, and it was rice harvest time. It gets very, very wet in the summer and in the monsoon, and November is the perfect time to go really because the monsoon's over, and you get clear blue skies and hot sunny days, but very, very cold nights. Again, nobody ever looks at you. So these pictures aren't stunning, but this was threshing the rice, threshing machine, and then putting it into bags, and then there's the straw left in a pile. quite interesting to see how it's done. Very dusty. So we arrived on the shores of Loch Tak Lake. The taxi driver who'd driven us out phoned up to where we were staying, and they came out on little boats to pick us up. And we went out to stay on a floating island in the middle of Loch Tak Lake. The huts they just balanced on floating vegetation. This was the one we stayed in, all made of bamboo and thatched. And the purple building at the back was our washroom. It was quite difficult getting out there in the middle of the night, balancing on bamboo poles and trying not to fall into the marsh. We didn't actually have many mosquitoes, but just in case, they provided us with mosquito nets. So we actually got into a sort of mosquito net tent to sleep, which was quite fascinating. You can see how the whole place is constructed of bamboo. There's bamboo floor and bamboo walls and thatched ceiling. And again, this is sort of homestay arrangement again. There were 3 huts for visitors, all booked. We were the only Westerners, though the rest were Indian tourists. And the family ferried us over, cooked for us, and that's where they did all the cooking, and took us out on boats. So the host took us out on his boat and explained how the fishing in the lake worked. There are nets laid everywhere, and circles of floating vegetation are sort of formed. I'm not quite sure how they do it, but those posts hold the nets, and there's people going backwards and forwards in little boats all the time, checking things out and bringing up fish. They also do some trapping of fish as well, and I didn't quite work out how that worked, but it looked quite intriguing. And it was just such a serene and lovely place to be, with water lilies and dragonflies, and pretty amazing. Lungri was renowned for taking selfies. So he's got selfies of himself everywhere we went. The sun sets very rapidly here as it did in Kolkata. So I really didn't have much time to take many shots. So I just fired up some shots as soon as it was looking good. And it was amazing, really. But it's a pity it doesn't last longer. But the light is just amazing. And but you don't have enough time to think about it, really. I did work a couple of pictures up into competition entries, and I like both of these. So that was quite an experience. We were only stayed there for one night because it was fully booked, which was good for tourism in the area. We were given flowers to wear behind our ears before we set off. And then we went to look round other parts of the area. We went to a viewpoint, which was an old military camp, to get a better perspective on what the lake looked like. So we were able to climb up into that tower, and you get the picture all those green circles are floating vegetation that are created by the fishermen. And then they set up their nets and they feed the fish in those circles, I think, and then catch them. And you can see in that picture quite clearly other little huts where people are living, and little and the boats that are plying around the area. So you get a bit of the scale. There's a boat there, and all the fishing stakes stuck out there, and more houses all over. It's a fascinating area. In this, beside the watchtower, there were other buildings that had been abandoned by the Assam Rifles. Some good dereliction shots to be had. And some very interesting decrees, the commandments of the commanding officer of the, I can't remember what AS stands for. But it's rather frightening, the things that they were told that they weren't to do, as if they might be thinking of doing them. The reputation of the Assam Rifles wasn't very good in this area because, as I said, there has been some insurgency now and again, and the relationship hasn't always been very good.
Just to give you a little rest for a second there, Caroline, you're getting quite a lot of comments from everybody about the sunsets, and everybody's absolutely taken with the lake and the circles and the buildings on the floating beds, etc. The colours and everything to go with it. It's some amazing photos, and it's like someone else told me, when a member does something like this, the member often thinks to themselves, well, these are my holiday snaps. But when you're at this end watching them, and I think all of the members will agree with me that they're not holiday snaps, they're an amazing sight for those to see who haven't been or will possibly never go. And you know, I know we're just not even halfway through yet, but it's amazing to see your photographs and the colours and everything else. And as I say, I think everybody, the comments you're getting are brilliant. So yeah, really enjoying it. Thanks up to present. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, if anybody does want to go out there, if we can ever travel again, then I know some people out there now who can help ease your way. So we went on from here to the Kibul Lamjau National Park, which occupies a sort of fair proportion of the lake. And as it says, it's the only floating national park on the globe. And we were looking out for the Thangai deer. We had a little boat outing from a jetty through a channel that had been cut through the vegetation. And it's sort of, you can see that it looks like a marshland, but actually all that vegetation is floating on over the water, and it rises and falls depending on the level of the lake, which depends on the monsoon and how much water there is around. So it goes up by a matter of quite a few meters, I think, over the different seasons, but the vegetation just stays there as a floating mat. Quite weird. And from the viewpoint, you can get a reasonable idea of the extent of it. And we were looking out carefully, binoculars peeled, looking for the deer. We think we might have seen some. If anybody can be sure, that would be nice. But anyway, I like to think that there's a few Sangay deer in there somewhere, but I wouldn't like to swear to it. And in the national park, I was amazed actually at how many people we met who understood biodiversity and understood the value of nature. And you know, the people who drove us around were involved in conservation projects, and it gives you hope. Because we couldn't stay 2 nights on the floating island because it was fully booked. This hotel looked pretty good on the internet. You would think it was quite a smart place. So Lakeview Hotel, it was actually quite a way back from the lakeshore, and that was the view from our room. It was really very, very like Fawlty Towers. It had a 4-page menu, but the restaurant wasn't open. And we could have food in our rooms, but when it came down to it, all there was available was eggs and tea. So we had eggs and chai. And we had eggs and chai for breakfast as well. So that was fine. They did bring us hot water. So I think they thought we were a little bit disappointed. We didn't get one of those rooms at the front, which look as if they could be smart, but they weren't ready yet. We were in a rather dingy room at the back. But I did manage to wash my hair, which was nice. So we went back through Imphal and then up into the hills. Senapati is a small town, well, quite a big town actually, on the Naga Hills. The road's quite good. That's the main road from Imphal to Kohima. And it's got quite a good surface most of the way, and it's quite a good road. We were joined for the next stage of the journey by Ed, who's doing a PhD from Cambridge on the Naga people, and his assistant, Negi. And it's amazing, nobody would look at me when I was taking photographs, but there you go. And then in Senapati, we met Harang. Trina had found Harang via Facebook. He's interested in setting up a sort of cultural eco-green tourism business. And we were sort of his guinea pigs. And I sincerely hope that tourism does keep going in this area. Obviously, the virus has put a paid to it for a while, at least, but he would like to develop things and just show off the wonders of the area in which he's grown up. And I think he can do it if he tries. And anyway, he did a very good, he was very good for us. So we stayed a night in Senapati. It was, it's just a town. It's on a river with the hills in the background. It has small shops selling all sorts of things. I was amazed also to find in the street that there was a proper Dulux paint shop in a sort of situation just like this one here. It didn't go back very far. It was just a sort of frontage, but they had a, a good array of Dulux paints and a paint mixer so that you could get any colour you wanted. There's also people crushing sugarcane for you if you wanted that to happen. There's a big market. We went there in the evenings, and again, it was very dark, and the pictures of bowls of frogs didn't really come out very well, and there were some other pictures that didn't really come out very well. So I'm sorry that there aren't any sensible pictures of that, but not to worry. Graham, I've sort of got to a point where it might be a good break.
Yeah, that's no problem. We can
Would it
go
be
on.
all right to break now?
Yeah, that's no problem whatsoever. I'll just go over one or two of the little bits that people have said about I think the most comments you've got was regarding the lakes and the circles and what an amazing sight that would have been. I'm sure you would agree with them all that it certainly was an amazing place, and the colours of the sunsets as well earlier on. You know, it was some stunning colours, and it seemed to change from a lovely orange colour to nearly a deep red. You know, there was some amazing colours there.
Those were from different directions.
Right.
Looking in one direction, it was orange, and then I went to the other side of our little floating island, and it was that sort of purple almost.
Right, yeah. And just after I mentioned about some people think their images are holiday snaps, where when others look at them, Doreen put, you know, it's an insight into another world that we never see. And I mean, I'm looking at these two bowls and I'm thinking, I think I'd be eating bread the whole tour. Did you try any of the food?
Oh yes, oh yes. Shall I put back in a different picture? The frogs weren't very nice.
No, you're all right. So you was into the food as well.
Oh yes, some of it wasn't all that good. I'm not very good on pork fat, and
Yeah.
pork fat is quite a delicacy.
Right. Yes,
So
indeed.
curried pork with a lot of fat was something I found hard. But most of the food was excellent.
As I say to everybody that knows me very well, I'll eat absolutely anything as long as I like it. So, right. On that note, we'll break for now. If we can have a 10-minute break, come on about 7 o'clock, and I'll start again at 7 o'clock thereabouts. And then we'll look to start somewhere about 5 past when everybody's rejoined. So I'll say cheerio to everybody now, and we'll catch you all in a short while at, as I say, about 7 o'clock. So bye for now. See you.